Hello, all you cool cats and kittens. This is Miss Molly here in your Edible Schoolyard kitchen. Sure miss having you in this space. It's a lot quieter right now. But we miss you and hope you're doing well and staying safe and healthy and cooking a lot of great recipes while you're home. So first I want to introduce who else is helping us today. We have Miss Reimert, who is tuning in virtually, so she's going to be checking some questions. We have Mr. Jeff, your other fellow kitchen teacher, who is tuning in virtually as well. And we have Miss Brittany, who's here acting as the sous chef today, helping with kitchen duties and helping with questions as well. And then we have Mr. Bobadilla, tech savvy man, here as well, who is helping film us and checking in on your questions too. So very first item I wanted to show you, which is really exciting. We have a kitchen incentive, garden incentive program going on. So if you tune in and are actively participating in our Google Classroom, the Edible Schoolyard Google Classroom, as well as our family cooking classes and our garden day next week, we have these goodie bags. So it's a market bag with our Edible Schoolyard logo, and we are filling it with goodies like a pot holder and some measuring spoons, a whisk, and some towels, as well as some really yummy fresh harvest meats. So we have, this is just an example of some harvest items that you might get in your market bag, of onions and leafy greens and beets too. So with that, we'll head over to our cooking station and get started. So this is our first time doing a virtual live cooking class with you guys. Excited to see who ends up participating, and we'll give you shout outs. If you have any questions during this live interaction, feel free to post them, type them, and we'll get to those questions as we can. If you don't get a chance to ask a question or think of something later, we are going to have a Edible Schoolyard Zoom call tomorrow. That's going to be a Q&A time. It'll be from 10 to 10:30. We'll send a link in the Google Classroom for you to tune in and be able to answer or ask, any questions for the garden or the kitchen team during that time too. So just keep that in mind. Let's go ahead and talk really quickly kind of about our focus today. So I know this is a very unique time for us as far as limiting our trips to the grocery store. So I figured I would touch base on our seasonality chart just to kind of remind you some items that are in season right now that are easy to find. I know it's a little harder to find things like grains or yeast or pasta sauces, things like that, or soups. So today we're going to show you something that might be a little harder to find, a can of soup on the grocery store shelf. But this is a way to make it homemade from scratch. That probably is a little cheaper, and it's definitely going to be that much better for you and more fresh. So this is our seasonality tree, as some of you scholars probably remember. So based on our seasonality chart, can anyone tell us how many seasons there are in a year and what season we are currently in? If you guessed, and maybe you didn't type it in, there are 4 seasons in a year. So we have spring, summer, fall, and winter. And we are currently in spring. So it is the season of spring right now. It's starting to get warm, and right now we have a lot growing in our garden. These are items that you'd definitely be able to find at Apple Market, here in Shafter, or La Fiesta Market, as well as a lot of locations in Bakersfield still. So we have, in our soup today, we have radish, carrots, citrus, we have green onions, leafy greens, garlic, And then we have a lot of other ingredients that if you tuned in yesterday to Google Classroom, you would have seen our vegetable stock recipe too, that we used a lot of other seasonal items too. So with that, I think I'll get started unless you guys have any questions so far or any comments.
Yeah, we have a shout out from Lola McDonald. She guessed 4 seasons.
Awesome. Good job, Lola. Great. Thank you. Thank you for participating. That's awesome. So our recipe today, I'm not going to go over all of it since I think most of you should have it either electronically or printed in front of you. If you don't and want this recipe, we can send it to you, so feel free to ask us for that too. But can anyone tell us how many parts there are to a recipe? You can use your clues like your recipe in front of you to determine how many parts there are. If anyone guessed 3 parts, you're correct. So there are 3 parts to a recipe, starting with the title, which our title today is Mexican lime soup. The second part is our ingredients, which tell us what we need. And the third part are our directions, which tell us what to do. Yes, Ms. Bree.
Shout out to Jace. He guessed 3 parts to a recipe.
Sweet, awesome. Jace, miss having you in the kitchen. Thanks Lola and Jace so far for participating and typing in your answers. Awesome. Yeah, we have another one.
Tiana Savala on Instagram also said 3.
Awesome, good job Tiana. Miss you Tiana as well. That's awesome. Good job, chefs. Great to hear from you. So our ingredients today, which again, I'm not gonna go through them all. I will go through them as we're kind of executing our recipe. But I'm gonna check in on time. All right, perfect. And again, thank you for bearing with us for our first family cooking class virtually. So we'll see how this goes. So we have the first direction I want to point out is heating our large soup pot over medium heat. You're going to add olive oil, garlic, jalapeno, carrots, salt and pepper, and saute for about 10 minutes. So we're going to need to prep the rest of those ingredients that I just named off first before we start sauteing. Okay. So I have some of this prepped already, and I know that in the materials list and the pre-prepared list, there were a few items that I mentioned. If you do happen to kind of fall behind because I might be moving a little faster, but hopefully you have other scholars that are working fast to chop some items and dice some items. This video will be available probably tomorrow live. So if you aren't able to make it tonight, you can tune back in and follow the recipe at your own pace too. But for sake of time, since we have a cutoff at 45 minutes, some of this is prepared already, so just so you know. So we are going to finish chopping first, or dicing, our carrots, then our jalapeno, and our garlic. So we have carrots from our garden. If anyone can answer this, most of you scholars should know, what part of the body are carrots really beneficial for, really good for? If anyone, did we get someone, Miss Brittany?
Yes, Miss Molly, Alicia Mendez would like to know where she can find the recipe.
Oh, awesome. Alicia, if you got the newsletter that was sent out via email by Ms. Reimert, that would have been on Monday, I believe. It will be linked onto that newsletter. But happy to send it to you. Mr. Jeff and Ms. Reimert have access to it as well if you need it right now, if you can't find that too.
We could also post it again tomorrow with the YouTube link.
Perfect, yeah. So carrots are really good for our eyes, as well as other parts of our body, but that is one part of our body that it's very beneficial for. And I'm just dicing this last carrot. It calls for 4 carrots, so I had 3 carrots already diced in this bowl. And I want to review with this one are knife safety tips, just a little bit. So we cut round things, and you can do this with me if you're at home watching, round things in half. We do that so that we have a flat surface to cut, dice, chop the rest of our ingredient with. And this calls for dicing our carrots. So dicing is going to be slightly smaller than a chop. And as you can see, I'm using my claw and saw, or claw and rock form best as possible. So the claw is guiding my knife along, as well as holding down the ingredients that I'm cutting. I also should have mentioned, and I apologize I didn't, but I washed my hands before this. Promise. So it's really important. You scholars always practice this in your kitchen. It's important that you're practicing really good hygiene by washing your hands before you start cooking, before you start touching ingredients, especially during this time. So if you're around other kids or other people just in general, really important that before we're cutting anything that we're about to put in our mouth, that we are washing our hands first. If you touch your phones, anything like that, it is important that we're washing our hands after that too. Because fun fact, phone screens are just as dirty as a toilet seat. So you might want to wash your hands after touching that. So next I'm going to finish prepping the garlic. And we have some diced already. One other fun trick before I actually do the Hulk smash that a lot of you students know. If you have a lot of garlic that you need to peel, I'm not going to fully do this because it gets really loud, but you can put it in 2 bowls that are the same size and top it and shake really hard. And a lot of times this gets really loud, so I didn't do it fully, but the skin will peel off. Much easier, especially if you have a lot of garlic. But since I just have a little bit left to do, you can also use the palm of your hand to smash down with the flat surface of your knife, peeling your garlic, and again, claw and saw, and this garlic is going to be diced again. So diced is in really small, tiny pieces. Childhood dream of having a cooking show. All right, next ingredient that we're going to use for our first batch of sauteing is if anyone guessed jalapeno or a pepper, you're right. So this is going to add a little bit of spice. The part of the jalapeno that adds the spice is the seeds, and the recipe calls for de-seeding or taking the seeds out of the jalapeno. I ended up leaving half of the seeds in. So as a family, you can decide what level of spice you want your soup at. So I'm just going to slice this. This is also diced. And you can see when I'm slicing, I'm using the tip, which is the sharpest part of this knife, to draw a line through the jalapeno and then chop. I saw Miss Brittany.
Yeah, Miss Molly, Jill O'Brien would like to know if there's any tips on getting the garlic smell off your fingers.
Oh, that's a great question. You know, I've tried like rubbing it with citrus, but honestly, I don't really have a good trick for that, to be honest. Do you, Miss Brittany? I mean, some people just really don't like it, so they wear gloves or something when they're chopping garlic or onions. But if anyone has a trick and posts it, that would be helpful. But sorry, Jill, not positive. I have our compost bucket. So this has everything that we can put in compost, which is pretty much most of what we have today as far as food scraps go. besides anything that has been sauteed with olive oil. But we're gonna put any like extra leafy greens. You can always put eggshells in compost too, which gives back to our soil. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and get started on the first direction. So it is sauteing. We're gonna heat up our olive oil first. Let's make sure our stove is on. And this recipe should make enough for about 8 people. Adults, maybe about 4. So our stove is on kind of more medium heat. This says about, I think it's 1/4 cup of olive oil. I'm just gonna eyeball, drizzle some olive oil. I know Jace, you're really good at eyeballing. And you can always add more of an ingredient, but it's hard to take away. So I'll start with that. And I'm gonna throw in our garlic first. Start sauteing the garlic. Just let that start sauteing. I think 5th and 6th grade have gone over this already, but the word sauté derives from a French word sauter. I only speak a little French, so I probably didn't pronounce that correctly, but sauter, which means, it translates in English to jump. So when you start noticing your ingredients like garlic that you add to a little bit of oil starting to jump a little bit, that is technically sauteing. And then the 3 other ingredients that we're adding into the pot right now with the garlic are the carrots, the jalapeno, and then salt and pepper. That's 4.
It smells so good.
It smells good already. Oh, it's crazy what a little garlic and oil can do. Alright, jalapeno, and now our carrots that are diced.
Rebecca Harris from Facebook said, get a stainless steel rub away bar. It is amazing.
Ooh, for the garlic, right?
I think so.
Cool. Good to know. Yeah, I feel like my pores just soak up garlic, the smell of garlic. Especially after making these soups. Alright. Heat is still at medium. I'm gonna let that saute until the carrots become pretty soft. They don't need to be fully cooked because we're gonna allow it to saute a little bit longer too. Are there any other questions right now though, while we're kind of waiting? And I want to mention too, anything you scholars or parents or grandparents are making together, we'd love to see pictures from you. So please post those on Instagram and either tag Grimley Academy Shafter or the Grimley Academy Edible Schoolyard. We also have a hashtag. It's hashtag GA Shafter. No. ESY GA Shafter. I have to look that up. I'll get back to you. We have the hashtag though for these, for any recipes or any garden photos that you have during this time. We'd love to see them.
And Landon on Facebook says that he likes garlic. And I know that's a fact.
You know that's a fact.
Have him at my table.
Landon. I love garlic too. Alright. And a little salt and pepper. So pepper calls for about 1/2 teaspoon of pepper. Again, kind of eyeball if you want, but I decided to remind you of when we're using our measuring spoons or measuring tools, the scooping and scraping. So I'm gonna scoop and with my finger scrape so that it's the exact amount. And same with our salt. The salt this recipe calls for about 1 teaspoon of salt. So again, scooping and scraping. Just a good practice when you are using measuring tools. Feel free, any other herbs just add to a dish. So any other herbs or spices that you want to add that you have in your pantry. Soups are fairly bulletproof. This one specifically, which you probably know by the title, is pretty bright and it's kind of a lighter style soup, I think appropriate for spring. All right, so it's been sauteing just a few minutes. It says 10 minutes in the recipe, but again, just gauging how cooked the carrots are becoming, and know that the carrots are going to continue to cook a little bit once we add more. So I'm going to go ahead and just add the tomatoes now. So this is the direction number 2. We have our vine tomatoes. I think Mr. Garrett pulled off, I think I saw in the office, he pulled 1 tomato off of our plant. So we should have more tomatoes from our garden soon too. This calls for de-seeding them. So again, de-seeding means no seeds. So I'm just kind of taking that center pit out. I've already chopped 3 little guys, so I ended up using 4 since they're pretty small.
Jill O'Brien said that they just made roasted carrots with honey, one of their favorite recipes from their first cooking class that they attended.
That's awesome. I love hearing that. That's so fun. That's a really good recipe. Simple. I love hearing what you guys are making. Add this to our compost. And go ahead and add our diced tomato. Says to saute for another 10 minutes. Again, might not take quite that long. So I would say probably just another 3 or 4 minutes, making sure the carrots, predominantly the carrots are softening and the garlic and jalapeno are releasing their flavors and aromas. Next, I'll just show you this now. So for direction number 3, it's going to be adding our vegetable stock, our oregano, and our rice. I'd mentioned to pre-make or pre-cook the rice. If you didn't, it's fine because the last few steps you can catch up on following the completion of this. So it'll be simple for you to catch up on that. Easy for you to put in the uncooked rice and then just cook it all together, and then all you're doing after that is adding excuse me, the garnish on top. So we have our oregano. This is what it looks like straight from your herb garden, and this is what it looks like dried. So a fun tip with dried oregano or dried spices, smashing it in your hand before you add it helps to release the aromas a little bit. And then I'll show you these next ingredients. So if you did hop into look at Google Classroom yesterday, I posted a video about cooking with what you have, which vegetable stock is an easy recipe to kind of cook with what you have. So we made vegetable stock. This is the vegetable stock I made in the video, and it is basically the liquid from a bunch of different spices, herbs, and vegetables that I had in my kitchen. That's reduced, so it's kind of more concentrated flavor. There's a little bit of salt, but again, easier to add more salt later. So making your own vegetable stock is another great example of something that's kind of hard to find right now that is really simple to make, and then you kind of have a little more control over how much sodium is in the vegetable stock, what vegetables you're using, and again, a really great base to have to make a lot of different foods. I'm gonna go ahead and add our veggie stock.
Miss Molly, we've had a few parents who joined late. Do you want to just maybe tell them what you're cooking today?
Yeah, definitely. Welcome. Glad you're here. We are making a Mexican lime soup with Miss Brittany and Mr. Bobadilla, and Mr. Jeff is tuned in virtually, and Miss Raymert as well. So our Mexican lime soup recipe you can find in the weekly newsletter if you don't have it in front of you. You'll also be able to look at this video probably tomorrow. So if you need to catch up on anything, but basically, if you do have the recipe, we are on direction number 3.
And Miss Molly, Marisol Valencia on Facebook asked why we have a 45-minute time limit.
Frame. It's just the Facebook Live feature and Instagram Live feature. That's what they cut it off to. So, not on our end, technology's end. It's the limit. I don't know. Alright, so now I'm going to add the dried oregano. Push it up a little bit. Again, if you have any other herbs or spices you want to add, I would even add maybe some cumin. And then this is the pre-made rice. So we're using a brown rice, but I know rice is an ingredient that is a little more difficult to find. So if you don't have rice, even just leaving it out completely, or adding a different type of grain, or doing something like beans also could be a good alternative too. So since this is pre-cooked, it's just not going to take as long once we're going to boil all of this. So you'll kind of see it's only going to take us another maybe 8 or 10 minutes to finish cooking everything. Did you have something, Miss Brittany?
Yes, Isela Ezekiel and Sophia Lugo are eating a soup of squash with green peppers, onions, and cheese right now.
That sounds so good. Can you bring some to me, please? And we use brown rice. Some of you scholars might know what brown rice is an example of, but it's an example of a whole grain. And if it's a whole grain, does anyone know what it still has on? So brown rice is a whole grain. What does a whole grain still have that's really good for us? It has a vitamin jacket, is the answer. So the vitamin jacket, basically kind of self-explanatory. It means that something like a whole grain, like brown rice, would be just that much better for you, have a little bit more nutrients because it's not been processed. So it still has its vitamin jacket.
Tony France from Facebook said vitamin jacket.
Awesome. Good job, Tony.
Jill O'Brien asked if there was a Google Classroom code for kitchen and garden classes.
Yeah, we'll share that. I'll have Miss Reimert share that with you if you haven't gotten it already.
And Sophie said she cooked carrots and celery earlier.
Love it. So good for you. Celery is really good for our digestive systems, as well as I've heard, because I get migraines sometimes, that it's really good for headaches too.
Is the husk the same thing as the vitamin jacket?
The husk.
We had a response with the husk for the question you just asked.
Oh, like maybe a corn husk.
Mhm.
No, it would be slightly different. I can show you our visual. Maybe after I finish this, I can show you a visual that gives the visual of a whole grain that still has its vitamin jacket. It would be different than the husk.
Tara Bland said, "We miss you, Miss Molly."
Missed you too, Tara. I'm glad you guys are all tuning in. It's so fun. Very exciting. Okay, so we've added our rice, vegetable stock, dried oregano, and now directions say to cover and bring to a boil. So covering it is going to trap in the heat a little faster, so it's going to come to a boil that much faster. I'm going to turn our flame up just a little bit, cover it, and then we'll show you an example of a boil. Thank you, Miss Brittany.
Katie Weeby said hello.
Hi, Katie.
And Henry.
Hey, Henry. I miss you guys. I want to see pictures of what you're making. I'm sure you've been making a lot of yummy stuff. So this is, thank you, Miss Brittany. Miss you, Chef. This is our visual that Mr. Jeff, thank you, Mr. Jeff, made for us of a grain. So the bran is basically the vitamin jacket. It's the rich, fiber-rich outer layer that protects the seed and contains B vitamins and trace minerals. The endosperm is the middle layer that contains carbohydrates and protein. So if it was white rice, it would still have the endosperm and the germ. It just wouldn't have that bran outer layer. So that's just an example kind of whole grain versus not whole grain. White rice, still good for you, still has carbohydrates, which are healthy for you, good to give you more energy and some protein, but brown rice just has that many more vitamins like fiber.
And
Alright.
we are approaching our 10-minute mark.
Okay, perfect. Great. So it shouldn't take much longer once this is boiling. So while we're waiting for it to boil, and then we'll turn it to a simmer just for a few minutes, I'm going to do the last few steps so that we can add everything in and garnish our soup. So we are juicing limes today. If you don't have a juicer, just using your hands, simple. We have this one available for us. So remembering, I've gotten so weak. I need you scholars to do this for me.
Aritza Perales from Facebook says hello and she misses us. And Tara Bland also said that they miss you, Miss Molly.
That's awesome. Hey, Aritza. Glad you guys are all here. I miss you too. All right, so we have our lime juiced. That's ready to go in. And then the last few ingredients that we're actually just gonna garnish our soup with, so that means to add on top, are somewhat prepped again, just because of the sake of time. So we have, can anyone guess what this is? I don't know if you can see it pretty well. This is a green onion. You could use green onion, even if you don't have green onion, if you have chive or something similar, or just onion. So easy, snip. If you just gather them all like this, you can either snip with a knife. These all in compost. And we have, can anyone guess what vegetable this is? This is our radish from your garden. Radish is really good for our heart. And the radish I sliced it into quarters. You can slice it, dice it into tiny pieces, however you like. But I'm slicing it. Radish is something that typically is sliced really thin. It's almost like paper thin, just to add a little crunch on top. So I have that ready, and then, does anyone know what this is? So this is cilantro. So cilantro, you can chop it or just easily tear it. So we have this already torn. So that's going to be the garnish, and then the last ingredient that we're going to add to the soup to just cook for a couple minutes are our beautiful leafy greens. So we have some purple kale and some chard, rainbow chard, and I'm going to use a little bit of the stem of the chard, and this is a technique called chiffonade, which is if you kind of roll something like leafy greens and then slice through it. You can also not even use a knife and just use your fingers as your tool. I'm slicing the chard into tiny pieces, and you could just tear the kale like so with our fancy fingers. I'm going to go ahead and be really careful with a hot pot. Steam will burn you too. I'm going to go ahead and add our leafy greens now so they can cook a little bit. So it's important that we're following kind of this soup sequencing, which sequencing means to kind of follow an order. So if we added the leafy greens in first, they would probably be really wilty. They might even burn a little bit. We just want them slightly wilted. Add a little bit more kale. You can just tear it straight. And really with the leafy greens, use anything you have. If you have spinach, kale, I probably wouldn't use something like butter lettuce or probably not even romaine unless it's like a thicker romaine. It'll get too wilted and it won't give off as much flavor. All right, I'm gonna add the lime juice. And I'll go ahead and just plate this one so you can see with our garnish. And I would love to see pictures of you chefs setting the table for your family. So hopefully you remember how to set the table, and pictures of this dish made and on your table. Thank you, Ms. Brady. I'll just use a plate. Perfect. Thank you so much. And I normally would be tasting as I go, but I'll refrain for sake of time. Smells really good. All right. So as you can see, the leafy greens really did not need very long to cook. I'm just gonna sprinkle some green onion. Let's do the radish. And cilantro. have Mexican lime soup. So now we really want to see pictures of what you're making. Miss Brittany, did you get the hashtag by any chance?
I did not. I'm waiting on
Sorry.
Sabrina.
We'll find the hashtag too and share that. But again, remember to tune in tomorrow with our Edible Schoolyard Zoom link, and the garden and kitchen team will be together from 10 to 10:30 for any questions you might have.
Do you want to maybe again remind people the incentives for joining our cooking classes?
Yeah, especially thank you, Mr. Bobadilla. If you missed the beginning of this live session, we touched on a kitchen incentive that we're doing. So we'll have 4 giveaways throughout the rest of the school year. So following each of our kitchen family cooking classes, we'll have this market tote bag for you that's going to be stuffed with kitchen goodies and produce from the garden and some recipes. So the next 3 kitchen virtual family cooking classes will be, the next one's May 7th, then we have May 21st, and then June 11th. So Mr. Jeff will lead the next one, and then Miss Brittany will lead the 3rd, and then the very last one is a surprise. So tune in. Thanks, guys.